What happened to me in that garage while my family celebrated upstairs is something I've buried deep inside for years, but I'm ready to share it because I know healing comes with truth. My name is Granny Lydia, and I sit here today with a heart that has known both profound pain and incredible healing. The story I'm about to share isn't easy to tell, but it's one that needs to be heard. Not just for me, but for everyone who has suffered in silence. If you've ever been silenced or made to feel invisible, know that you're not alone. Please share your experiences and let's support each other. Together we can break the chains of silence that keep so many trapped in their pain. I remember those nights so clearly. The sound of laughter and karaoke drifting down from upstairs. My family gathered in joy, completely unaware of what was happening just below them in that cold garage. While they sang their hearts out, mine was breaking in ways I couldn't even understand at the time. This isn't just a story of pain, though. It's a story of survival, of finding strength in the darkest moments, and ultimately of healing and reclaiming my life. What I endured in that garage while my family's voices filled the house above is something no one should ever experience. But I survived, and today I'm here to share my truth. Looking back at my early life, you would have thought we were the perfect family. We gathered regularly for celebrations, birthdays, holidays, and those beloved karaoke nights that became our tradition. The house would fill with music and laughter, creating memories that should have been nothing but joyful. My family was everything to me. We were close-knit and loving, or so it seemed from the outside. I treasured those moments when everyone would come together. The living room would transform into our personal concert hall with aunts, uncles, cousins, all taking turns at the microphone. It felt safe. It felt like home. I remember how the preparations would begin days in advance. My mother would clean every corner of the house, making sure everything was perfect for our guests. The smell of her cooking would fill the air as she prepared everyone's favorite dishes. My father would test the karaoke machine multiple times, ensuring the sound was just right. He took pride in our family gatherings, wanted everything to be perfect for the people he loved. The anticipation would build throughout the week, phone calls between family members, discussing who would come, what songs they might sing, what food they would bring. It was like preparing for a celebration each time, and in many ways we were celebrating being together, celebrating our family bond, celebrating life itself. When the day arrived, the house would slowly fill with people. My aunts would arrive early to help with the cooking, their laughter mixing with my mother's as they shared gossip and family stories. The kitchen would become a hub of activity, with pots bubbling, conversations flowing, and the occasional taste test that would lead to playful arguments about seasoning. My uncles would gather in the living room, setting up chairs, arranging the space, so everyone could see the makeshift stage area where the karaoke machine stood. They would joke and tease each other, already competing about who would sing better that night. The cousins would run through the house, our excited voices adding to the beautiful chaos. As the sun began to set, the real magic would begin. The first person would take the microphone, usually one of my uncles who needed no encouragement, and the night would officially start. Sometimes it would be an old classic that everyone knew, something that would get the whole room singing along. Other times it would be a new song. Someone was eager to try their voice, cracking on the high notes, leading to good-natured laughter and encouragement. The children would perform too, standing on chairs to reach the microphone, our small voices trying to match the big emotions of the songs we chose. Our parents would cheer and clap like we were professional singers, building our confidence, making us feel special and loved. It was during these moments that I felt most secure, most part of something bigger than myself. Food would appear throughout the night, plates passed from hand to hand, no one going hungry, everyone making sure everyone else had eaten. The dining table would groan under the weight of dishes, each family member having contributed something special. It wasn't just about the singing, it was about the sharing, the togetherness, the love that seemed to flow as freely as the music. The house itself seemed to come alive during these gatherings. Every room had a purpose: the kitchen for cooking and eating, the living room for performing, the hallways for children playing hide and seek, the porch for those who needed a breath of fresh air between songs. Even the garage sometimes served as overflow space for storing extra chairs and supplies, though it would later become a place of such darkness. I loved watching the different generations interact. My grandmother would sit in her favorite chair, tapping her foot to the music, occasionally sharing stories of her youth, when she would sing these same songs. The middle generation, my parents and their siblings, would take turns at the microphone, their performances ranging from heartfelt ballads to comedic interpretations that had everyone in stitches. We children would watch and learn, absorbing not just the music, but the family dynamics, the inside jokes, the shared history that made us who we were. But darkness has a way of hiding in plain sight. The person who would later become my tormentor was already there among us, someone I trusted. Someone who smiled at family gatherings, who joined in the singing, who seemed like just another loving member of our circle. This person held a position of trust and respect in our family. They were always there at every gathering, their voice joining in the chorus, their laughter mixing with ours. They would help set up chairs, pass plates of food, compliment my mother's cooking. They seemed so normal, so much a part of the fabric of our family that no one could have imagined the monster that lurked beneath the surface. Looking back now, I can see how calculated their integration into our family was. They didn't just attend gatherings, they made themselves essential to them. They would arrive early to help set up, stay late to help clean up. They remembered everyone's favorite songs, would request them on others' behalf, showing a thoughtfulness that endeared them to all. I remember how they would sometimes seek me out during these gatherings. At first it seemed innocent enough, a special attention that made me feel important. They would ask about school, about my friends, about my dreams. They listened in a way that made me feel heard and understood. In a large family where attention was divided among many children, this focused interest felt special. They knew exactly how to build trust, how to make themselves indispensable to our family. They would offer to help with tasks, volunteer to drive family members who needed rides, remember everyone's birthdays and special occasions. They wove themselves so deeply into our family structure that they became irreplaceable, or so it seemed. The grooming process was so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that even now, looking back with adult eyes and understanding, I can see how impossible it would have been for my young self to recognize it. They started by making me feel special, chosen, different from the other children. They would share little secrets with me, harmless things at first that created a sense of exclusivity between us. At first there were just small things that felt wrong, a lingering touch that lasted too long, a comment that made me uncomfortable but that I couldn't quite understand. I was young and innocent. I didn't have the words or the understanding to process what was beginning to happen. The first time I felt uneasy, I dismissed it. They had patted my back, but their hand had stayed there, moved in a way that felt different from how other family members touched me. But I told myself I was being silly. This was family. This was someone everyone trusted. If something was wrong, surely the adults would notice. Then came the comments, seemingly innocent on the surface, but with an undertone I couldn't identify. Observations about how I was growing up, how I was becoming beautiful, how I would break hearts one day. These words made me squirm, but I couldn't articulate why. Everyone complimented children, didn't they? So why did these compliments feel so different, so heavy? The shift was subtle, so subtle that I questioned myself constantly. Was I imagining things? Was I being too sensitive? These questions plagued me as the person who should have protected me began to show a different face when we were alone. They became skilled at creating opportunities to be alone with me, volunteering to help me with homework when I didn't need help, offering to take me to the store when someone mentioned needing something, finding reasons to be wherever I was, always with a plausible explanation that no one would question. During family gatherings, they would position themselves strategically, always aware of where I was, always finding ways to intercept me if I was heading somewhere alone. They would appear in doorways, just as I was passing through, would volunteer to help me carry things to the garage, would suggest I show them something in another room. Their constant presence began to feel suffocating, but how could I complain about someone being helpful, being attentive? The boundaries began to erode slowly, systematically. A hand on my knee during family dinner that stayed too long. A whispered comment in my ear that made me uncomfortable. An insistence on a hug that felt too tight, too long, too intimate. These moments began to accumulate, each one pushing a little further, testing how much I would accept, how much I would stay silent about. They were clever about their approach, never doing anything overtly inappropriate when others might notice. The touches that lingered too long happened under tables or in brief moments when others looked away. The comments that made me uncomfortable were whispered quickly, then followed by a normal conversation, as if nothing had happened. They created a reality where I constantly questioned my own perceptions. Those early signs were like cracks in a foundation, small at first but destined to grow. The inappropriate jokes when no one else was around. The way they would find excuses to be alone with me. The gradual erosion of boundaries that I didn't even know I had the right to defend. I began to dread their presence at family gatherings. The joy I once felt when relatives arrived turned to anxiety. When I saw their car pull up, I would try to stay close to other family members, avoiding being alone, but they were persistent, creative in their pursuit. They had the patience of a predator stalking prey. My behavior began to change in small ways that no one noticed, or if they did, they attributed to normal growing pains. I became quieter during gatherings, sticking close to my mother or father. I stopped volunteering to help with tasks that might put me alone with anyone. I made excuses to stay in my room when I could, but these changes were subtle, and in a busy household with many children, they went unremarked. The contrast between their public face and their private behavior was jarring. In front of others, they were the perfect family member, generous, funny, helpful. But when we were alone, even for moments, the mask would slip, and I would see something else in their eyes, something that made my stomach turn and my heart race with an instinct I didn't yet understand. They began to test my silence in small ways, making slightly inappropriate comments, then watching to see if I would tell anyone. When I didn't, they grew bolder. Each boundary crossed without consequence emboldened them to cross the next. The genius of their approach was that each individual incident seemed too small to report, but together they were building a prison around me. My family continued their celebrations upstairs, completely unaware that something sinister was taking root in their midst. The contrast between the joy above and the growing unease I felt became sharper with each passing day. I wanted to tell someone, but what would I say? That they looked at me strangely, that their touches made me uncomfortable, that their jokes weren't funny. These things seemed so small when I tried to put them into words, yet they loomed so large in my experience. I feared being dismissed, being told I was overreacting, being accused of trying to cause trouble in the family. The weight of this secret began to change me. Even before the abuse escalated, I smiled, sang less enthusiastically at our gatherings, participated less in family activities. But these changes happened gradually, and everyone had explanations. My parents thought I was becoming a moody preteen. My siblings assumed I thought I was too cool for family time. No one suspected the real reason for my withdrawal. So I stayed silent, watching, waiting, hoping I was wrong, hoping it would stop, hoping someone else would notice and intervene. But the foundation had been laid, the trust had been built, the trap had been set. And I, young and innocent and trusting, had no idea how dark things were about to become. The karaoke nights continued. The family gatherings went on. The laughter still filled our house. But for me, something had shifted. The safety I once felt was beginning to crumble, replaced by a growing dread that I couldn't name, couldn't explain, couldn't escape. The perfect family I thought I had was about to reveal its darkest secret, and I would be the one to bear the weight of that revelation alone. I remember that first time with a clarity that still haunts me. The garage was supposed to be just a storage space filled with old boxes and forgotten items. But that night, it became something else entirely. It became the place where my innocence was stolen, where my trust was shattered, where my world changed forever. The evening had started like any other family gathering. The house was full of relatives, the smell of food wafting through the air, the karaoke machine already warming up with someone testing the microphone. I had been in the kitchen helping my mother arrange plates, trying to stay busy, trying to stay surrounded by people. But then they appeared in the doorway. "We need more chairs from the garage," they said casually. "Can you help me get them?" Their voice was normal, their expression friendly. Anyone watching would have seen nothing amiss, just a family member asking for help with a simple task. My mother, distracted by the stove, nodded absently, thanking them for thinking ahead. I wanted to say no, wanted to suggest someone else could help, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I refuse such a reasonable request without seeming rude or strange? So I followed them, my feet feeling heavier with each step. The walk to the garage seemed both endless and too short, my heart beginning to race for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. The garage door opened with its familiar creak, and they flicked on the single bulb that cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The space smelled of motor oil and dust. Old paint cans lined the shelves, and boxes were stacked against the walls. But something felt different that night. The space felt smaller, more confined, more isolated from the house where my family gathered. The family was upstairs as usual, their voices carrying through the ceiling singing some old favorite that everyone knew by heart. I can still hear that song sometimes, and it takes me right back to that moment, the moment when confusion turned to fear, when discomfort became terror. At first they maintained the pretense, pointing to some chairs stacked in the corner, asking me to help move them. But as I reached for the first chair, they stepped behind me too close, much too close. Their hand touched my shoulder, and this time it didn't move away. Instead, it gripped tighter, holding me in place. Wait, they said, their voice different now, lower with an edge that made my skin crawl. I want to talk to you about something. You're special, you know that. You're not like the other kids in the family. You're more mature, more understanding. I tried to step away, but their grip tightened. Their other hand came to my other shoulder, and suddenly I was trapped between them and the wall of boxes. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This was family. This was someone everyone trusted. This couldn't be what it felt like, could it? I didn't understand what was happening at first. My young mind couldn't process the violation, the betrayal, the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about safety and family. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong, and I was powerless to stop it. The transformation was complete. The person I had known, the family member who sang at our gatherings, who helped with dishes, who everyone loved, was gone. In their place was someone I didn't recognize, someone whose eyes held a darkness I had never seen before. Their hands moved from my shoulders and the real nightmare began. Above us, the karaoke continued. Someone was singing a love song, their voice cracking on the high notes, and I could hear the laughter and encouragement from the family. The normalcy of those sounds contrasted so sharply with what was happening to me that my mind struggled to hold both realities at once. Time became strange during those moments. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been. The family would have noticed if we were gone too long. They were careful, calculating, making sure not to raise suspicion. They knew exactly how long they could keep me there without anyone questioning our absence. The manipulation began immediately. You wanted this, they said. This is your fault. No one will believe you. These words became chains that bound me as surely as any physical restraint. They knew exactly what to say to ensure my silence, to make me feel complicit in my own abuse. The guilt they placed on me was crushing. They made me feel responsible for what was happening, as if I had somehow invited this nightmare. They twisted reality until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was I really to blame? Had I done something to cause this? You've been flirting with me. They said, their words like poison. You've been asking for this with the way you look at me, the way you act around me. If you tell anyone, I'll make sure they know it was your idea, that you seduced me. Who do you think they'll believe? My young mind couldn't process the manipulation, but the fear was immediate and overwhelming. They painted a picture where I was the guilty party, where my family would be disgusted with me if they knew, where I would be the one to destroy our happy family gatherings. How could I face my parents, my siblings, if they thought I had done something so shameful? They were systematic in their manipulation, alternating between threats and false affection. One moment, they would threaten to hurt me or someone I loved if I told. The next, they would stroke my hair and tell me this was how they showed love, that this was special, that other kids would be jealous if they knew how special I was. My family was right there, just above us, close enough that I could hear individual voices, could pick out my mother's laugh, my father's deep baritone, yet they might as well have been on another planet. I was alone, completely and utterly alone with my abuser and my shame. The physical sensations are burned into my memory. The cold of the concrete floor through my clothes, the smell of their breath too close to my face, the roughness of their hands, the way my body tried to make itself smaller, to disappear, to be anywhere but there. The sound of my own heartbeat so loud, I was sure everyone upstairs must hear it. When it was over, they straightened their clothes and mine, with practiced efficiency, making sure nothing looked amiss. They picked up 2 chairs as if that had been our purpose all along. Then they turned to me with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. Remember, they said, this is our secret. You wouldn't want to upset your mother, would you? Think how heartbroken she would be if she knew what you did, how disappointed your father would be. This is better kept between us, don't you think? The conflict tore at me. How could I destroy my family's happiness? How could I shatter their world with this ugly truth? The loyalty I felt to them became another prison, keeping me silent, keeping me trapped. I loved them too much to burden them with my pain, or so I told myself. We returned to the house, them carrying the chairs, me following on legs that felt disconnected from my body. They rejoined the party, seamlessly commenting on the song being sung, grabbing a plate of food, acting as if we had simply been getting chairs. Nothing in their demeanor suggested anything out of the ordinary had occurred. I tried to do the same, tried to slip back into the celebration unnoticed, but everything had changed. The bright lights hurt my eyes. The laughter sounded too loud, almost mocking. The food my mother pressed into my hands tasted like ash. I sat in a corner, trying to make myself invisible, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how the world could continue, as if nothing had changed. Throughout the rest of the evening, they would catch my eye occasionally, a small smile playing on their lips, a reminder of our secret. I could feel their gaze on me, heavy and possessive. They knew they had won that first battle, knew I wouldn't tell, knew they had successfully isolated me with shame and fear. That first incident ended, but I knew it was just the beginning. The garage door closed behind me, but I carried what happened there with me. I returned upstairs to my family, my abuser following shortly after, acting as if nothing had happened, and I learned that night how to wear a mask, how to pretend everything was fine while dying inside. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur. I moved through it like a ghost present, but not really there. When relatives hugged me goodbye, I tried not to flinch. When someone commented that I was quiet, I forced a smile and blamed tiredness. When my parents finally said it was time for bed, I escaped to my room and lay awake all night replaying what had happened, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what I had done wrong. In the days that followed, I waited for someone to notice the change in me. Surely my parents would see that something was wrong. Surely they would ask the right questions, and I would find the courage to tell them. But life continued as normal. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, homework, chores, all the ordinary rhythms of family life. And I learned to hide my pain, to push it down, to pretend that everything was fine. The garage became a place of dread for me. I would find excuses not to go. There would volunteer for any chore that kept me in the house, would suddenly remember homework whenever someone mentioned needing something from storage, but I couldn't avoid it forever, and they knew it. They had marked their territory, claimed their victim, and they were patient. That first incident was just the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch on for years. Each family gathering became an opportunity for them to corner me. Each celebration became a potential trap. The garage, my prison, the ceiling, my barrier to salvation, the karaoke, my soundtrack to hell. And through it all, my family sang on, oblivious to the horror happening just beneath their feet. Looking back, I understand now what I couldn't then. That first incident was carefully planned and executed. They had been preparing for it, testing my boundaries, grooming me for that moment. And when it came, they were ready with their threats, their manipulation, their careful timing. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it with the confidence of someone who had done it before, or at least thought it through completely. The trauma of that night changed me fundamentally. The child who had walked into that garage died there, and someone else emerged. Someone who knew that family could hurt you, that trust could be weaponized, that love could exist in the same house as evil. That knowledge was too heavy for a child to carry, but I had no choice. I picked it up that night, and I would carry it for years to come alone, and in silence, while my family sang above me, unaware that their happy home had become my hell. What started as isolated incidents soon became a pattern of horror. The garage became my regular nightmare, a place I was taken to again and again, while my family remained blissfully unaware upstairs. Each time was worse than the last as my abuser grew bolder, more confident in their control over me. The second time happened just 2 weeks later. Another family gathering, another excuse to get me alone. This time, they didn't even bother with the pretense of needing chairs. They simply waited until everyone was distracted by a particularly enthusiastic performance and motioned for me to follow them. my body responded automatically, already trained by fear to obey. I had spent those 2 weeks hoping it had been a one-time thing, a terrible mistake that would never be repeated. But the moment I saw that look in their eyes, that slight tilt of their head toward the garage door, I knew my hope was foolish. They had tasted power and they wanted more. The emotional manipulation intensified alongside the physical violations. They had studied me, learned my fears, my insecurities, and they used them all against me. They knew exactly how to break me down, how to make me feel worthless, how to ensure I would never speak up. "You're dirty now," they would whisper. "No one will want you if they know what you've done. Your parents will be disgusted, they'll send you away. They'll choose me over you because I'm family and you're just a dirty little girl who seduced an adult." These words burrowed into my mind like parasites, eating away at my self-worth. Each session in the garage came with new variations of the same theme. I was worthless, I was dirty, I was guilty, I was alone. And slowly, horrifyingly, I began to believe them. The frequency increased. What might have been once a month became weekly, then multiple times a week. Family gatherings that should have been joyful occasions became opportunities for my abuser to corner me, to drag me to that garage while everyone else was distracted by their celebrations. They became expert at reading the room, knowing exactly when they could slip away with me unnoticed. They learned the patterns of our gatherings, knew who would sing longest, who would drink enough to be less observant, who would be too caught up in conversation to notice our absence. They planned their attacks with military precision. Sometimes they wouldn't even wait for gatherings. They would find other excuses to visit the house, offering to help with repairs or maintenance, always when they knew I would be home. Their presence became a constant threat. Even on days when nothing happened, just seeing their car in the driveway would send me into a panic. I became an expert at predicting when it would happen. I could see it in their eyes, feel it in the air like a storm approaching. The dread would build inside me as I watched them watching me, knowing what was coming, knowing I was powerless to prevent it. The physical abuse evolved too. What had started as inappropriate touching became more violent, more degrading. They seemed to feed on my fear, growing more excited, the more terrified I became. They would experiment with different ways to hurt me, always careful not to leave marks that others might see. They introduced objects into their torture, things found in the garage that were never meant to be used. The way they used them, tools meant for fixing became instruments of pain. Storage boxes became surfaces for unspeakable acts. The everyday items in that space were transformed into weapons against my body and soul. My world shrank to the size of that garage and the secret I carried. The isolation was suffocating. I couldn't relate to my peers anymore, couldn't participate in normal conversations about normal things. How could I talk about homework or crushes when I was living in a nightmare? At school, I became known as the quiet one, the weird one who didn't want to make friends. Teachers noted my declining grades, my lack of participation, but their concern never went deep enough to uncover the truth. I became expert at deflection, at making excuses that were just plausible enough to avoid further scrutiny. I stopped participating in after-school activities, stopped accepting invitations to friends' houses, stopped doing anything that might put me in a position where someone might notice something was wrong. My world became school and home, and even home wasn't safe anymore. While they laughed upstairs, I was dying inside. The fear and shame consumed me. I couldn't tell anyone, and I didn't know how to escape. Every smile I forced, every normal conversation I attempted, took enormous effort. I was performing, constantly playing the role of the happy family member, while inside I was screaming. The contrast during family gatherings became almost unbearable. I would sit at the dinner table listening to conversations about ordinary things, work, gossip, vacation plans, while my abuser sat across from me acting perfectly normal. Sometimes they would catch my eye and smile, and I would have to smile back or risk someone asking what was wrong. I developed strategies to try to protect myself. I would volunteer to help in the kitchen where I could stay close to my mother. I would offer to watch the younger children, keeping myself surrounded by others. I would complain of headaches or stomach aches, trying to be sent to bed early. But these tactics only worked sometimes. The psychological damage accumulated like poison in my system. I stopped sleeping properly, jumping at every sound, terrified that they were coming for me again. Food lost its taste, colors seemed duller, and joy became a foreign concept I had known once but could no longer access. Night terrors became my constant companion. I would wake up gasping, covered in sweat, sure that I was back in that garage. Sometimes I would sleepwalk, finding myself standing at my bedroom door, as if trying to escape. The lack of sleep made everything worse, made it harder to maintain my mask during the day. My mental health deteriorated rapidly. I began to dissociate during the abuse, floating somewhere outside my body because being present was too painful. I developed anxiety that made my heart race at the slightest trigger. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket that I couldn't shake off. I started hurting myself in small ways, digging my nails into my palms until they bled, pulling out my hair strand by strand, refusing to eat, then eating too much, trying to make myself less appealing, trying to punish the body that had betrayed me by attracting this attention. The abuser noticed these changes and used them as further ammunition. "See how crazy you're acting," they would say. "This is what happens when you don't cooperate. When you make things difficult, you're only hurting yourself. No one will believe someone who acts like you do." They began to play mind games beyond the physical abuse. They would move things in my room just slightly enough to make me question my memory. They would deny conversations we had just had, making me doubt my own recollection. They would alternate between extreme cruelty and false kindness, keeping me constantly off balance. Sometimes after particularly brutal sessions, they would hold me and cry, saying they were sorry that they couldn't help themselves, that it was my fault for being so irresistible. These moments of twisted tenderness were almost worse than the violence because they made me question everything, made me wonder if maybe I was misunderstanding, if maybe this was actually love. The gaslighting was relentless. They convinced me that my perception of reality was flawed, that what felt like abuse was actually special attention, that my pain was drama, that my fear was ingratitude. They rewrote history with every interaction until I couldn't trust my own memories, my own feelings, my own mind. My body began to betray me in other ways. I developed chronic stomach problems that doctors couldn't explain, headaches that medication couldn't touch, mysterious pains that would come and go. My body was screaming what my voice couldn't say, but no one knew how to interpret the signals. The contrast between my inner turmoil and the normal family life continuing around me was excruciating. How could they not see? How could they not know I felt invisible, like I was fading away, becoming less real with each passing day, while my family sang and laughed just feet above my suffering? School became both a refuge and another source of stress. Away from home, I could pretend for a few hours that I was normal. But the effort of maintaining that pretense was exhausting. And there was always the knowledge that I would have to go home, that they might be there waiting. I began to have elaborate fantasies about escape, about running away to somewhere they could never find me, about becoming someone else entirely, someone who had never been touched by this darkness. But I was too young, too trapped, too broken to make these fantasies reality. The worst part was how normal everything looked from the outside. Our family gatherings continued. The photos from those events show a seemingly happy family. No one looking at those pictures would guess that one child was dying inside, that a predator sat among them, smiling for the camera. Sometimes I would stare at those photos, trying to see if there was any sign, any clue that could have alerted someone to what was happening, but there was nothing. Just smiling faces and happy occasions, while underneath it all a child was being systematically destroyed. The abuse had become my new normal. I expected it, planned around it, structured my life to minimize it when possible and endure it when necessary. The garage had become synonymous with pain and fear, while the sound of karaoke from above had become the soundtrack to my torture. Years later, certain songs can still transport me back to those moments, can still make my heart race and my palms sweat, can still make me feel like that trapped child, listening to my family's joy while experiencing hell. The music that once brought me such happiness had become forever tainted by association. But even as I adapted to this nightmare, even as it became routine, a part of me kept hoping someone would notice, someone would ask the right question, someone would see through my mask and rescue me. That hope was small and growing smaller, but it was there, keeping me alive even as everything else in me was dying. The escalation seemed endless. Each time I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Each time I thought I had reached the limit of what I could endure, I discovered I could survive more. The human capacity for suffering, it turns out, is far greater than we imagine. And I was learning that lesson in the most brutal way possible. Through it all, my family sang on, their voices drifting down through the ceiling, a reminder of the normal world that existed just out of reach. They were so close and yet so far separated from me by more than just physical distance. They lived in a world where family meant safety, where home meant comfort, where love didn't come with a price tag of pain. And I lived in a different world entirely, a world where trust was weaponized, where love was twisted into something monstrous, where the people supposed to protect you were the ones you needed protection from. Two worlds existing in the same house, separated by a ceiling and a secret that was slowly killing me. The silent suffering and psychological damage. The silence became my constant companion and my greatest enemy. It wrapped around me like a straitjacket, growing tighter with each passing day. Each time I opened my mouth to speak, the words would die in my throat, choked off by fear, shame, and the terrible weight of the secret I carried. Living with this burden while watching my family continue their lives in blissful ignorance was a special kind of torture. They would ask if I was okay, and I would smile and lie. They would invite me to join the singing upstairs, and I would make excuses. They never pushed, never questioned, and part of me hated them for that, even though I knew it wasn't their fault. How many times did I stand at the edge of confession? The words lined up in my mind, ready to spill out. Mom, Dad, something terrible is happening to me. But then I would see their happy faces, hear their laughter, imagine the destruction my words would cause, and I would swallow the truth back down where it burned like acid in my stomach. The weight of carrying this secret was physically exhausting. I felt like I was aging rapidly, my young body bearing the burden of an adult horror, my shoulders curved inward as if trying to protect my heart. My eyes developed dark circles that makeup couldn't hide when I got older. My smile became a practiced thing that never quite reached my eyes. Sometimes I would practice telling in front of the mirror, whispering my truth to my reflection. But even alone in my room, the words felt dangerous, explosive. They had the power to destroy everything I knew, and I wasn't sure I could survive the aftermath. Even if people believed me, and that was a big if, everything would change forever. The psychological damage ran deeper than any physical wound could. I began to believe the lies my abuser had planted in my mind, that I was worthless, that I deserved what was happening, that no one would believe me if I told. These thoughts became my reality, more real than the actual world around me. My inner dialogue became viciously self-attacking. You're disgusting. You asked for this. You're ruining everything by being so dramatic. Why can't you just be normal? These thoughts played on repeat, a constant soundtrack of self-hatred that drowned out any remnants of self-worth I might have had left. I developed what I now know was severe anxiety, though at the time I just thought I was going crazy. My heart would race at random moments. I would break out in sweats when nothing was happening. My hands would shake, and I would have to hide them in my pockets or under tables. I couldn't breathe properly, feeling like there was never enough air in my lungs. The panic attacks started gradually. At first, just moments of overwhelming fear that would pass quickly, but they grew in intensity and duration until I would find myself locked in the bathroom, gasping for air, convinced I was dying. My family thought I was developing asthma. They never suspected the real cause of my breathing problems. My sense of self crumbled. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. The bright, happy child I had once been was gone, replaced by someone hollow. Someone who went through the motions of living without actually being alive. I was a ghost haunting my own life. I began to feel disconnected from my own body. It betrayed me by existing, by being something that could be hurt, by continuing to grow and change in ways that might make the abuse worse. I would catch glimpses of myself in windows or mirrors and feel startled, as if seeing a stranger. This body didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to my abuser. The shame was suffocating. It colored everything, made me feel dirty and broken beyond repair. I stopped believing I deserved love, protection, or kindness. The abuse had rewired my brain, teaching me that I was nothing more than an object for someone else's use. I became hypervigilant, constantly scanning my environment for threats. Every footstep in the hallway made me tense, every door opening made my heart skip. Every unexpected touch, even from safe family members, made me flinch. I lived in a constant state of fight or flight, except I could neither fight nor flee. Sleep became my enemy, rather than my refuge. Nightmares plagued me every night. Sometimes they were straightforward replays of the abuse. Other times they were abstract horrors that left me gasping and disoriented. I would lie awake for hours, dreading sleep, but equally dreading the dawn that would bring another day of potential abuse. During the day, I perfected the art of invisibility. I learned to move through spaces without drawing attention, to sit in corners where I could see all entrances, to speak only when spoken to, and even then to say as little as possible. I made myself small, quiet, forgettable, hoping that if I disappeared enough, the abuse might stop. Every family gathering became an exercise in endurance. I would sit at the dinner table, surrounded by laughter and love, feeling like an imposter. They thought they knew me, but they didn't know the real me, the damaged me, the me who had been broken in that garage while they sang overhead. The emotional scars multiplied and deepened. Trust became impossible, not just in others, but in myself. I questioned my own perceptions, my own memories, my own worth. If someone who was supposed to care for me could hurt me so badly, what did that say about me? I developed elaborate coping mechanisms, though I didn't recognize them as such at the time. I would count things obsessively. Floor tiles, ceiling tiles, steps from one room to another. The counting gave me something to focus on. Besides the pain, I would create detailed fantasy worlds in my mind, where I was someone else, somewhere else where none of this had ever happened. Food became complicated. I would swing between having no appetite at all, my throat closing at the thought of eating, and binge eating, trying to fill the emptiness inside me. My mother noticed and worried, but attributed it to teenage phases. She had no idea that every meal was a battle between my body's needs and my mind's rebellion. The garage haunted me even when I wasn't in it. I could be sitting in class or lying in bed, and suddenly I would be back there reliving every moment. The smell of motor oil and dust would fill my nostrils, the cold concrete floor beneath me, the sound of karaoke muffled through the ceiling above. These flashbacks were vivid and overwhelming. They would hit without warning, triggered by things others wouldn't even notice: a certain tone of voice, a particular song on the radio, the slam of a door, the smell of someone's cologne. My body would react as if the threat was current and immediate, even when I was physically safe. School became both harder and easier. Harder because concentrating was nearly impossible when your mind was constantly cycling through trauma. Easier because it was time away from home, away from the possibility of being cornered. But even at school, I couldn't truly escape. The secret went with me, poisoning every interaction, every moment. I watched my classmates with a mixture of envy and alienation. They worried about tests and crushes and what to wear to school dances. These concerns seemed so foreign to me, so impossibly innocent. I felt decades older than them, separated by an experience that had aged me beyond my years. Teachers noticed my declining performance, my lack of engagement, but their concern was surface level. One suggested I might be depressed and recommended I talk to the school counselor. But how could I tell a stranger what I couldn't tell my own family? How could I trust someone I barely knew when I couldn't trust the people closest to me? My world had shrunk to two extremes: the false normalcy I performed for others and the horrific reality I endured in secret. There was no middle ground, no safe space, no moment of genuine peace. I was trapped in a prison of silence, with walls built from fear and bars made of shame. The loneliness was perhaps the worst part. I was surrounded by people who loved me, or thought they did. But I was utterly alone with my pain. They couldn't share it because they didn't know about it, and I couldn't tell them because the consequences seemed too terrible to bear. Sometimes I would test the waters with hypothetical questions. What would you do if someone was hurting a kid, but the kid was too scared to tell? How would you know if someone in the family was bad, but these tentative reaches for help were too vague, and my family too trusting of each other to pick up on the subtext? I began to have thoughts of ending it all. Not detailed plans at first, just a vague sense that death might be preferable to continuing this existence. The thought of never having to go back to that garage, never having to pretend everything was fine, never having to carry this secret another day, had a certain appeal. These thoughts frightened me, even as they comforted me. I wasn't actively suicidal, but I was passively willing to die. If a car was coming, I might step off the curb a little slower. If I was sick, I might hope it was something serious. The idea of an escape even through death became a fantasy I returned to when the pain was too much. But even in my darkest moments, something kept me going. Maybe it was hope that things would change. Maybe it was fear of what my death would do to my family, who despite everything I still loved. Maybe it was just the basic human instinct to survive. Whatever it was, it kept me breathing, kept me pretending, kept me silent. Years passed like this, years of family gatherings where I smiled and participated while dying inside, years of abuse that continued to escalate while everyone around me remained oblivious. Years of psychological torture that left wounds no one could see, but that cut deeper than any physical injury. The silence became part of me, embedded so deeply that breaking it seemed impossible. It wasn't just fear keeping me quiet anymore. It was habit. It was identity. I had been the keeper of this secret for so long that I didn't know who I would be without it. Looking back, I can see how the prolonged trauma changed my brain development, how it rewired my nervous system, how it shaped my personality in fundamental ways. The person I might have been without this abuse was lost forever, replaced by someone hypervigilant, anxious, disconnected from their own body and emotions. But at the time, all I knew was that I was drowning. Drowning in shame, in fear, in a secret that was too heavy for any child to carry. And all the while, my family sang on their joyful voices, a mockery of my silent screams, their happiness, a stark contrast to my despair. I survived those years, though I'm not sure how I survived the silence, the shame, the psychological torture that was in many ways worse than the physical abuse I survived, but at a cost that I'm still paying decades later. Because silence doesn't just hide trauma, it compounds it. It takes the initial wound and lets it fester, lets it spread, lets it poison everything it touches. And by the time I finally found my voice, finally broke that silence, the damage was so extensive that healing would take years of work. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First came the breaking point, the moment when the silence finally became unbearable, when the fear of speaking was finally outweighed by the fear of continuing to live this way. That moment was still coming, but it was coming. And when it arrived, it would change everything. The breaking point came on an ordinary day. There was nothing special about it, no dramatic moment of revelation, just a quiet realization that I couldn't live like this anymore. I was disappearing, fading away, and if I didn't do something soon, there would be nothing left of me to save. I remember sitting in my room hearing the familiar sounds of family preparation for another gathering and feeling something shift inside me. For the first time, the fear of continuing to live this way outweighed the fear of speaking up. The thought of enduring one more night in that garage was suddenly unbearable. It wasn't courage exactly that filled me in that moment. It was more like desperation had finally overcome terror. I had reached the absolute limit of what I could endure. My body was breaking down. My mind was fracturing, and some survival instinct deeper than fear kicked in and said enough. The realization came with a strange clarity. I was going to die if this continued. Maybe not physically, though that was possible too, but certainly spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. The person I was meant to be was already mostly gone, and what remained was hanging by a thread. I stood up and walked to my mirror, staring at the stranger looking back at me. This girl with hollow eyes and sharp cheekbones from barely eating. This girl who jumped at shadows and spoke in whispers. This girl who had learned to be invisible to survive. I didn't recognize her, but I knew I couldn't let her story end this way. Finding my voice after years of silence was like learning to speak for the first time. The words had been trapped inside me for so long that I wasn't sure they would come out right. I practiced in whispers when alone, trying different ways to say the unspeakable. I thought about who to tell first, my mother who I loved, but who might not believe me, my father who might believe me, but might also do something violent that would tear our family apart. A teacher who seemed kind but was still a stranger. The choice felt impossible, each option carrying its own risks. In the end, it wasn't a planned decision. The words came out unexpectedly during what started as a normal conversation. My aunt had noticed I looked tired and asked if I was sleeping okay. Such a simple question, but something in her tone, genuine concern without judgment, made the dam break. "I'm not okay," I heard myself say. The words hung in the air between us and I couldn't take them back. My aunt's face changed and she sat down beside me, waiting. And then the story started pouring out. Not all of it. Not the details, but enough. The garage. The family gatherings. The person who everyone trusted. The years of silence. Her reaction wasn't what I had feared. She didn't call me a liar. She didn't blame me. She didn't say I must have misunderstood. Instead, she pulled me into her arms and held me while I shook. And then she said the words I had needed to hear for so long: "I believe you." Those 3 words changed everything. They broke the spell my abuser had cast, the one that said no one would believe me. They validated my reality after years of gaslighting. They gave me permission to feel everything I had been suppressing. They told me I wasn't crazy, wasn't making it up, wasn't to blame. But speaking the truth out loud also made it real in a new way. For years, it had been my secret shame. Something I could almost pretend wasn't happening when I wasn't in that garage. Now it was out in the world and there was no taking it back. The protection of silence was gone, replaced by the terrifying vulnerability of truth. My aunt wanted to go to my parents immediately, but I begged her to wait. I needed time to prepare for what would come next. The implosion of my family as I knew it, the confrontation with my abuser, the questions, the disbelief, the anger that would surely follow. I had lived with this secret for years, but they would be learning it all at once. We agreed she would come with me when I told my parents. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I ran through every possible scenario in my mind. What if they didn't believe me? What if they chose my abuser over me? What if they blamed me for not speaking up sooner? What if? The next day moved both too fast and too slow. I went through the motions of normal life. One last time, knowing everything was about to change. My hands shook as I made breakfast. My voice trembled when I said goodbye to my siblings as they left for school. This might be the last normal morning we ever had. When my aunt arrived that afternoon, I nearly lost my nerve. The words that had come so easily the day before now stuck in my throat again. But she held my hand and reminded me that I had already done the hardest part. I had broken the silence. The rest was just following through. My parents were in the living room when we walked in. They looked up surprised but pleased to see my aunt. Their smiles faded when they saw our faces. My mother asked what was wrong, and the concern in her voice nearly broke me. How could I shatter her world? How could I tell her that her home hadn't been the safe haven she thought it was? "We need to talk about something serious," my aunt said, her voice steady when mine couldn't be. "Something has been happening to your daughter, and she needs you to listen without interrupting until she's finished. Can you do that?" The confusion on their faces hurt to see. They looked between my aunt and me, trying to understand what could be so serious. My father turned off the television. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother reached for my father's hand, instinctively sensing that whatever was coming would require mutual support. And then I began to speak. The words came out choppy. At first, fragmented pieces of a story, too big to tell all at once. The garage, the family gatherings, the person they trusted, the threats, the silence, the years of suffering while they sang upstairs unaware. I watched their faces change as understanding dawned, horror replacing confusion, disbelief warring with recognition. My mother's hand covered her mouth, tears already forming. My father's face went through several colors before settling on a dangerous shade of red. When I finished talking, the silence was complete. My parents sat frozen, processing what I had told them. Then my mother was moving, crossing to me, pulling me into her arms, sobbing apologies. "How did we not know? How did we not see?" "I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." My father's reaction was different. He stood up abruptly, his whole body vibrating with rage. "Where are they?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm going to kill them." My aunt had to physically block his path, reminding him that violence wouldn't help, that we needed to handle this properly. The aftermath of that conversation was a whirlwind of activity. Police were called, reports were filed. My safe world exploded into chaos as the legal system began its slow, grinding process. Family members had to be told, sides were chosen, battle lines drawn. Some believed me, immediately horrified that this had happened under their noses. Others struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the monster I described. Still others refused to believe, choosing to see me as a troublemaker destroying the family for attention. The confrontation with my abuser was handled by authorities, not by my family. They denied everything, of course. Called me a liar, said I was mentally unstable, had always been a problem child. Their tears seemed so genuine as they proclaimed their innocence that even I almost doubted myself. But I had found my voice and I wouldn't be silenced again. I repeated my truth to police officers, to social workers, to therapists. Each telling was agony, but also liberation. The secret that had been killing me was finally out in the light where it could begin to lose its power. The family gatherings stopped abruptly. The karaoke machine gathered dust. The house that had been full of music and laughter became quiet as we all tried to process this new reality. The soundtrack of my torture was finally silenced, but the silence that replaced it was heavy with grief. My siblings struggled to understand why their world had suddenly changed, why certain family members no longer visited, why there were whispered conversations that stopped when they entered rooms, why I went to so many appointments with serious-looking adults. The guilt I felt for disrupting their innocence was overwhelming. I had protected them by keeping silent, but in speaking up, I had destroyed their sense of safety too. They looked at me differently now, not with blame but with a wariness that broke my heart. They were learning too young that family could hurt you. But alongside the chaos and pain, something else was happening. I was starting to breathe again. Real breaths that filled my lungs completely. The weight that had been crushing me for years was lifting, not all at once but gradually, like morning fog burning off in sunlight. Therapy began immediately, though I resisted at first. How could I trust a stranger with thoughts and feelings I had kept hidden for so long? But my therapist was patient, skilled, trauma-informed. She created a safe space where I could begin to untangle the web of lies my abuser had woven around me. The legal process was its own form of torture, having to repeat my story to stern-faced strangers who picked apart every detail looking for inconsistencies, having to stay strong when defense attorneys suggested I was lying or confused or seeking attention, having to face my abuser in court and maintain my truth under their stare. But I had found my strength, and it grew with each challenge. The girl who had been too terrified to speak was finding her voice getting louder, clearer, more confident. With each telling of my truth, I reclaimed a piece of myself that had been stolen. Support came from unexpected places, teachers who noticed the change in me and offered quiet encouragement, friends who stood by me even when the details were too heavy for young shoulders to bear, extended family members who chose to believe me despite the cost to family harmony. The healing didn't happen overnight. It took years of therapy, years of learning to trust again, years of reclaiming my body as my own, years of separating my identity from what had been done to me. But it started that day when I finally said the words, "I'm not okay." Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. I wish I had found the courage before so much damage was done, but I also understand why I couldn't. Survival sometimes means silence, and I had been in survival mode for so long that speaking felt like choosing death. What I know now is that silence slowly kills you anyway. It just takes longer. The secret eats you from the inside out until there's nothing left but a shell. And if I had waited much longer, that's all I would have been. Breaking the silence saved my life. Not in a metaphorical way, but literally. The path I was on led nowhere good. The pain was becoming unbearable, the coping mechanisms more destructive, the will to continue fading. Speaking up was the first step back from that edge. To anyone suffering in silence, know this: your voice matters, your truth matters. You deserve to be heard and believed and protected. The fear of speaking feels insurmountable, but the fear of continuing to live with the secret should be greater. Finding the strength to escape isn't about being brave, it's about reaching the point where the pain of staying silent becomes greater than the fear of speaking up. It's about choosing life, even when that choice means everything will change. Because everything needs to change when you're living in hell. and yes, speaking up will blow up your world, but sometimes destruction is necessary for rebuilding. Sometimes you have to tear down the house built on lies before you can construct something true and solid and safe. My family never sang together the same way again. The innocence of those gatherings was lost forever, but in its place came something different. Something more honest, if more painful. Something that acknowledged that darkness can hide in plain sight, but also that truth has the power to banish it. The garage was eventually cleared out and repurposed, no longer a chamber of horrors, but just a storage space again. The ghosts that haunted it were exorcised by truth, by justice, by the simple act of refusing to keep secrets anymore. And me, I'm still here, still healing, still growing, still discovering who I am beyond the trauma. The journey from victim to survivor to thriver is long and winding with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure, but it started with 3 words: I'm not okay. Those words saved my life. They can save yours too. The first steps were the hardest. Each day felt like climbing a mountain. Simply getting out of bed was an achievement worth celebrating. My therapist taught me to acknowledge these small victories, to see them as the foundation stones of recovery. A shower taken, a meal eaten, a night survived. These were my early triumphs. Therapy became my lifeline twice a week at first, then weekly as I grew stronger. My therapist specialized in trauma, and she understood the unique devastation of childhood sexual abuse. She never rushed me, never pushed me to go faster than I was ready to go. She created a safe space where I could finally examine the wounds that had festered in darkness for so long. We started with basic stabilization techniques. Ways to ground myself when flashbacks hit, methods to calm my nervous system when anxiety spiraled out of control. She taught me that my reactions were normal responses to abnormal situations, that my body and mind had done exactly what they needed to do to survive. Learning to feel safe in my own body again was a monumental task. For years I had dissociated, fled from physical sensations because being present meant feeling pain. Now I had to slowly, carefully rebuild the connection between my mind and body. Yoga helped, though at first even gentle movements could trigger panic. I remember the first time I was able to complete a full yoga session without dissociating. I cried on my mat, not from sadness but from a kind of wonder. I was present in my body, fully there, feeling the stretch of muscles, the rhythm of breath. It was a revelation that I could exist in my physical form without fear. Support systems became crucial to my healing. My family, despite their initial shock and the upheaval of our lives, rallied around me. My parents blamed themselves endlessly for not seeing the signs, and we spent many therapy sessions working through their guilt and my reassurance that predators are experts at hiding in plain sight. My mother became fierce in her protection of me. She researched trauma healing, attended support groups for parents of abused children, educated herself on every aspect of recovery. She couldn't undo the past, but she threw herself into supporting my future with a determination that both touched and sometimes overwhelmed me. My father channeled his rage into advocacy. He began volunteering with organizations that support abuse survivors. He spoke at community gatherings about the importance of believing children, of creating environments where they feel safe to disclose. He transformed his guilt into action, making sure other children might be spared what I endured. Finding a support group for survivors was transformative. The first meeting terrified me. Walking into a room full of strangers, knowing we all shared this terrible commonality, felt impossible. But when I heard their stories, so different yet so familiar, I felt less alone for the first time in years. These women and men became my warriors, my teachers, my chosen family. They understood without explanation why certain sounds made me panic, why trust felt impossible, why healing wasn't linear. They celebrated my victories and held space for my setbacks without judgment. Through the group, I learned that healing isn't a destination, but a journey. Some days I felt strong, capable of facing anything. Other days the trauma felt as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. But my fellow survivors showed me that both experiences were valid parts of the process. Reclaiming activities that had been tainted by association became part of my healing journey. Music had been so poisoned by those karaoke nights that for years I couldn't bear to hear singing. But slowly, with the help of therapy, I began to separate the beauty of music from the horror it had soundtracked. The first time I sang again, really sang, not just hummed nervously, but opened my mouth and let my voice soar, it felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. My abuser had stolen so much, but they couldn't steal my voice forever. I sang in the shower at first, then in my car, finally joining a community choir where music became healing instead of harm. Rebuilding my sense of self was perhaps the longest journey. I had been defined by my trauma for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. In therapy, we worked on identifying aspects of myself that existed before the abuse and new parts that were emerging as I healed. I discovered I was creative, writing poetry and painting as ways to express emotions too complex for conversation. I found I was compassionate, my own pain creating a deep well of empathy for others who suffered. I learned I was stronger than I ever imagined, surviving what I had survived, and choosing to build rather than just endure. Education became a pathway to empowerment. I threw myself into learning about trauma, about psychology, about the systems that fail to protect children, and how they could be improved. My grades, which had plummeted during the abuse, slowly improved as my ability to concentrate returned. College felt like a fresh start where few people knew my history. I could be just another student, not the girl whose family had been torn apart by scandal. But I also found that sharing my story when I felt safe to do so created connections and helped others feel less alone in their own struggles. Relationships were complicated, terrifying territories to navigate. Trust felt impossible when someone you should have been able to trust implicitly had betrayed you so profoundly. Dating seemed like an insurmountable challenge. How could I let someone close when closeness had meant danger? My first relationship after disclosure was with someone patient and understanding who had their own history of trauma. We moved at a pace that would have frustrated others but felt revolutionary to me. Every small step, holding hands, kissing, trusting them to sleep beside me, felt like climbing Everest. There were setbacks, times when healing felt impossible, when the weight of what happened threatened to pull me under again. Anniversaries were particularly difficult. The changing seasons bringing sense memories I couldn't control, the smell of certain foods cooking, the sound of particular songs, the way light fell at certain times of day. During one particularly dark period, I almost gave up. The pain felt endless, the healing too hard, the damage too extensive. But my support system caught me, held me, reminded me how far I had come. They showed me that healing isn't linear, that setbacks don't erase progress, that surviving each difficult day is its own form of victory. I began volunteering with organizations that support abuse survivors. First, just stuffing envelopes and answering phones, but eventually co-facilitating support groups and speaking at awareness events. Helping others heal became part of my own healing journey. Their courage inspired mine. Their progress reminded me that recovery was possible. Forgiveness became a complicated topic in my healing. Well-meaning people would suggest I needed to forgive my abuser to truly heal. But I learned that forgiveness isn't required for healing and that some acts are unforgivable. What I did need to do was release the hold they had on my life, to stop letting their actions define my future. I did work on forgiving myself, though, for not speaking up sooner, for the ways I had hurt myself, trying to cope, for the relationships damaged by my trauma responses. Self-forgiveness was harder than I expected, requiring me to extend to myself the compassion I readily gave others. Creating new traditions to replace the tainted ones became important. My family no longer had large gatherings with karaoke, but we found new ways to connect: quiet dinners where real conversation replaced performance. Small celebrations that felt safe and manageable. New memories to layer over the painful ones. Physical health improved as mental health stabilized. The chronic pain and mysterious ailments that had plagued me during the abuse years gradually resolved as my body learned it was safe. My appetite normalized, sleep became restorative again, colors seemed brighter, and joy became accessible. Joy. That was perhaps the most surprising part of healing, that it was possible to feel genuine happiness again, not just the performance of it. I remember the first time I laughed. really laughed from deep in my belly without immediately feeling guilty for experiencing pleasure. It was revolutionary. Purpose emerged from pain. I pursued a career in social work specializing in childhood trauma. My experience, while never required to be shared, became a powerful tool when appropriate for connecting with clients who felt no one could understand. Their eyes would change when they realized I truly knew, not just intellectually, but viscerally what they were surviving. The legal resolution of my case took years and brought its own challenges and revelations. Justice in the legal system and healing in my heart operated on different timelines. What the courts decided mattered, but it didn't define my recovery. I had to find my own justice in reclaiming my life. Family dynamics forever changed, eventually found a new equilibrium. Some relationships were lost forever, people who couldn't reconcile the truth with their perceptions, but the relationships that survived became stronger, more honest, more precious. We learned to speak difficult truths, to protect each other fiercely, to never again mistake silence for safety. I learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or becoming who you would have been without the trauma. It means integrating the experience into your life story without letting it be the only story. It means building a life that honors both your wounds and your resilience. Today, I stand as living proof that healing is possible, that the human spirit, while capable of being broken, is also capable of remarkable repair, that speaking truth, however belatedly, can break the power of secrets, that support and therapy and time and determination can transform surviving into thriving. I may have been broken, but I am not defined by my past. Today I am strong. Today I am whole again. Not the same whole I would have been without the trauma, but a different kind of whole. Scarred but beautiful, wounded but wise, broken once but rebuilt stronger at the broken places. To those still trapped in silence, know that your story matters. Your pain is valid, your fear is understandable, but your life is worth more than your secret. Healing begins with speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes, even if the world shifts beneath your feet, even if everything changes. Because everything should change when you're living in pain. You deserve safety and support, and the chance to discover who you are beyond trauma. You deserve to sing your own song, not to the soundtrack of someone else's violence, but to the rhythm of your own healing heart. The garage that once housed my darkest moments no longer has power over me. It's just a structure, just a space. The real architecture of my life is built from survival and courage, from speaking up and reaching out, from the slow, beautiful work of healing. And that architecture is unshakable now, built on truth, reinforced by support, decorated with the hard-won wisdom that comes from walking through hell and choosing to keep going, until you don't just survive, but truly live. Until the music in your life drowns out the echoes of pain. You deserve peace. You deserve love. You don't have to live in fear anymore. Healing begins with speaking your truth, and I promise you, from someone who has walked this path, it is worth every difficult step. Find your voice. Break your silence. Reclaim your life. The journey is long, but you don't have to walk it alone. And at the end, you'll discover that you're not just a survivor, but a warrior. Not just broken, but beautiful. Not just healing, but whole. This is my story. But it doesn't end with pain. It ends with hope, with proof that what seems unsurvivable can be survived. What seems unforgivable can be transformed. What seems lost forever can be reclaimed. Your story can end with hope too.